The structure of the webinar will be that we'll introduce about OTGS first and what we do. Afterwards, as Emma said, we'll leave it to Ekovia and Amarjit, and we'll take over and talk about the topic of the day, which is food ingredients. And during the presentation, there will be a chat window where you can write questions, and write the questions you want to answer, and we'll get back to them at the end of the presentation. These will then, as I said, will be addressed. The webinar will be recorded, so you know that this will be uploaded later on, and we will send the links after we've done with transcribing it and everything, and we'll send it out to all of your participants as well. So let's start a little bit. OTGS, the main mission for us is to facilitate trade from developing countries that wants to export to Sweden and the EU. Firstly, we function as a point of contact for exporters and export promotion organizations. The aim of the point of contact is to be a one-stop shop where developing countries can contact us, and we'll help them develop their export capacities and the legal requirements that are required to export to Sweden and the EU as well. We also talk about market trends that are current right now and that needs consideration when entering the Swedish markets. And the most information, or our most important channel for communication, is through our website as well. We also have the capacity to work on longer projects, long-term projects. Here we build more with a capacity building. We're in the partner organizations and partner companies to really get the companies closer to the Swedish market through our multi-year project as well. So then we usually visit the market and look at different companies and see how they are prepared to entering the Swedish market and what basically they need to improve in order to improve the chances of entering the market as well. And right now we're active in working in Bolivia with superfoods. We work with in Kenya with agricultural products, and Ukraine and Moldova with IT services. We're also evaluating projects in Georgia, Armenia, and Rwanda as well. This is one of the tools that are on our website. It's the Road to Export. And there's a sort of guide or 5 modules or step-by-step guide to recommendation how to map out the target market, how you should prepare and get ready to do business. It ends with a checklist as well, where the importers or you find information, skills, and materials that they have and what this need to be done to start their journey, the export journey. And this is us. Right now, we're the 6 of us. We have a little bit different backgrounds in trade promotion, trade policy, and trade regulations. And we're growing this year as well. So we're going to be more during the year. We're increasing our numbers. And if you'd like to reach out to us, you have your contact information at the top there, otgs@kommerskollegium.se, or just go on our website and go to Open Trade Gate. Thank you. That was all from me. Amarjit, do you want to take over?
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. So good afternoon, everyone. My presentation, along with Avita, we're going to talk about the Swedish market for food ingredients. Now, this is a study that we did for Open Trade Sweden last year, and the report is available from the website. And what we want to do is to give you some key findings from the research, and we want to highlight the opportunities in terms of exports, especially for producers in developing countries. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to our company. So our company was formed in 2001. Originally, we were called Organic Monitor, and we changed our name to Ekovia Intelligence in 2017. to better reflect the range of services that we provide. So we've been doing market and technical research since 2001. We do business sustainability consulting. We do seminars and workshops at various industry events, exhibitions, conferences. And related to this seminar, we do a sustainable food summit that we host in Europe, North America, Latin America, Asia Pacific. If you need more information, there's our website. And I just want to do a quick plug for our Sustainable Food Summit, which we're hosting in Amsterdam. It's a European-wide event, and that's going to be on 15th, 16th of June. And this is our 14th European edition, and we're going to cover sustainability issues in the food industry. So I'm now going to pass it to Avita, and I'm going to come back for the Q&A at the end of the session. So over to you, Avita.
Yes, thank you, Amajit, and thank you, Oscar and Emma. Can you see my presentation in a preview mode? Yes, perfect. Okay, great. So let's kick off this presentation. So in this presentation, we'll be presenting our findings from the report that Amajit already mentioned. So let's start with a brief introduction. Sweden is one of the largest consumer markets in the Nordic region, and it has a population of around 10.4 million, according to the World Bank. And this slide illustrates the development of the Swedish food market between 2016 and 2021. And we can see that the market has been growing. We can see that the market grew from 29.5 billion in 2016 to 32 billion USD in 2021, which was an increase of about 15%. And the fastest growing categories was oils and fats, as well as spreads, sweets, and sauces and spices. So the next slide shows the breakdown of the actual food market. And we can see the meat is the largest product category with about 19%. And the followers are dairy products and eggs with 16%, and confectionery and snacks 13%. And yeah, you can see what kind of product categories and to which proportion actually represented on the Swedish food market from this slide. So the Swedish market for food ingredients is it's highly fragmented. There are several sort of larger players, but there are there's a number of smaller players, small, medium-sized players, and some of these companies actually source directly. However, majority of food companies and food importers actually source from other European countries, such as the Netherlands. Usually larger companies, larger food processors, and larger importers source directly from developing countries or countries of origin. And some of these food companies are actually vertically integrated. That means that they act as importers, as traders, then they act as processors or bottlers, and then they also act as suppliers of finished products. Here is an example of Santa Maria, which is a Nordic spices and flavoring companies that is vertically integrated. And some of the largest players on the Swedish market include AAK, which is a Swedish-Danish company, one of the largest producers and processors of vegetable oils. Then it's Arla Foods. It's also a Swedish-Danish dairy company. And other companies such as Orkla is like one of the leading food processors on the Swedish market. So despite the fact that majority of the food ingredients are actually sourced via other European countries, there are still some food ingredients that are sourced directly, and based on these indicators, we sort of highlighted several ingredients that present opportunities for exporters from developing countries, and one of them is turmeric, which we can see the imports to Sweden has fluctuated in the last few years, but from 2020 to 2021, there's been a positive development. There was a drop in 2020 because of issues with logistics related to the lockdowns and the pandemic. We can see that more than 80% of the turmeric imports to Sweden actually come from developing countries. So India, of course, represents majority with 81%, and other developing countries include Peru, and the rest is a combination of European Union countries as well as extra EU countries. So another such ingredients are groundnuts. So groundnuts have a wide range of applications. On the Swedish food market, they are used as an ingredient in various food products, but they are sold also as a snack in Swedish retailers. And we can see that the demand or the value and volume of imports have been growing in the last, let's say, 5 years. And actually, the imports of groundnuts to Sweden increased by about 12% in terms of volume and 11% in terms of value. And we can see that large part of groundnuts coming into Sweden comes from Argentina, and the following countries include other sort of European countries such as the Netherlands, Austria, and Germany. So seaweed extracts such as carrageenan are also quite prospective, mainly because the application is quite wide. They're quite versatile, and they also fit into one of the trends that I'll be speaking about later, which is increasing popularity of plant-based food. So, for example, carrageenan can be used as a substitute for gelatin, as a food thickener, and here are imports of seaweed extracts to Sweden. And we can see that the volume of imports fluctuated, but this is mainly because of imbalances in the supply, and also there are many competing other thickeners and gums that are in demand as well. So we can see that around 63% of seaweed extracts imported to Sweden come from actually extra EU import, and some developing countries that are represented here are China and India, and other important exporters include Denmark and Germany. So guar or guar gum has also very similar application to seaweed extracts. We can see here that the imports between 2017 and 2021, imports in terms of volume increased by almost 21%. And in terms of value, increased by 55%. And the application is very similar to other hydrocolloids, which means thickening and emulsifying additive. So more than 47% of guar gum is imported from outside of EU, and we can see that Pakistan is a leading supplier, including India when it comes to developing countries, and other important exporters include Denmark and Germany, but as also the USA. So how does the supply chain of ingredients look like when it comes to exporting food ingredients from developing countries to Europe? So we can see that the importer or processor is one of the main entry point for food ingredients from outside of EU. Large processors or retailers can also source directly, but it's not very common, especially for the Swedish market. There's also agents that can be based in either the European country or in the country of origin. However, in Europe, or especially in the Swedish market, agents are not that common as well. So the most reliable route, or the most common route, is going via traders or importers. So what are the market trends on the Swedish food market? So these are the main ones that we identified. So there's a rise in consumer awareness about synthetic ingredients. So this has been sort of augmented or highlighted by the COVID pandemic as well. So consumers are looking at the health impacts of the food that they eat, and they are looking for food products that include ingredients that are not harmful to their well-being. There's also growing importance of ethical sourcing, which is related to increasing consumer awareness about sustainability and the environmental impacts that food products have. There's also increasing demand for plant-based food, which I already mentioned, and also organic production methods. So because the awareness of consumers is increasing, they getting more and more information about conventional farming methods versus alternative, more eco-friendly farming methods, and also importance of sustainability schemes and standards. So this is a trend that we've seen across the board, not only in Sweden. I will speak more about it later. So when it comes to increasing popularity of plant-based food, so this slide illustrates the Google searches for veganism, comparing worldwide average with the UK. And then we see that the interest of the Google searches have been increasing substantially from 2012, but in 2017 there's been exponential increase in Google searches, and we expect this trend to continue. And we can also see that in some countries like the UK actually overtake the worldwide average. So what are the reasons for this? Why do consumers actually opt for plant-based foods? Why are they interested in plant-based foods? So here we have a graph as to why respondents actually, what the reasons are, why consumers choose this product, comparing meat eaters with non-meat eaters. And we can see that health is #1 reason why people who intend to cut down meat choose plant-based products. And whereas non-meat eaters actually prefer reasons such as animal welfare, so the consciousness or the attention, the reasons are quite different. But this is a great illustration as to why specific type of consumer groups, flexitarians versus vegetarians, how they think. So increasing importance of sustainable and traceable sourcing is also quite becoming important. So here are examples of, for example, AAKs, which is a Swedish-Danish vegetable oils processor. They they set up their own sustainable and traceable sourcing of shea butter, as well as they're also part of Sustainable Coconut and Coconut Oil Roundtable, which is a very recent development where companies or stakeholders from the industry, stakeholders who are involved in coconut and coconut oil, supply chain formed a roundtable, and they are developing a charter that pertains to sustainable and traceable sourcing of coconut oil. And another example is the UEBT certification, as well as Fair Wild certification, that are becoming quite popular. So another trend is increased labelization. We know that there are more than 200 eco-labels in the food sector. On one hand, this is seen as a positive development because they all kind of represent certain attributes, certain sustainability attributes. However, on the other hand, it creates a proliferation of labels and also consumer confusion, because consumers they really struggle to kind of grasp or what specific eco labels mean as opposed to the others, and they are getting confused. So in terms of entering the European market from outside of EU, there are certain guidelines that you should follow. First of all, there are compulsory EU regulations that have to be met, that's non-negotiable, there are also voluntary sort of regulation that certain buyers may have, but when it comes to EU regulations, you have to abide by them. There's also an importance of documentation and technical dossiers. You as an exporter from a developing countries, you have to make sure that your documentation or technical dossiers is up to date before you start approaching buyers. European trade shows are a very good place to meet European buyers and also showcase your product and also your technical dossiers. I will speak more about that later. And also you have to be able to choose or target the right buyer depending on the volume requirements that they have, as well as the range or the portfolio of products that you have and supply. So here are some examples when it comes to compulsory EU regulation. So this is not an exhaustive list. These are just the main ones. So when it comes to safety, we have the general food law. Then there are these regulations that pertain to the maximum residue levels for pesticides, as well as heavy metals. Also, labeling and packaging regulation is very important, and you should follow the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, and also substances allowed in the European Union, which is covered by these regulations 1333/2008 and 1334/2008. So I already mentioned documentation. So this is in general what your technical dossier should include. So safety data sheets, this contains product description, classification, hazard identification, and information on safety measures. Technical data sheets, these contain a product description, product classification, quality analysis, information on applications and certificates, as well as certification of analysis, which contains analytical data from the product delivered, and also kind of correlates with the technical data sheets and pre-shipment sample approved by the buyer. So in terms of what buyers, or how to choose a buyer, so obviously, there are various sort of variables that you need to factor in. You have large and medium-sized buyers. Although these buyers tend to source directly, very often they require like larger volumes, whereas small, medium-sized buyers, they may be even more leeway there to negotiate the minimum volume requirements. However, they don't necessarily tend to source directly from developing countries, especially in Sweden. There's an option that also food companies can act as importers. So we have these large to medium-sized food companies. So these include conventional food companies, However, this is not it's not very common for them to source like smaller volumes, and also small to medium-sized natural and organic food companies. So again, these companies are more open to negotiating. There's more leeway to negotiate the volume requirements. However, they tend to focus on specific ingredients, certified organic. Yeah, with all these buyers, it's very important that your quality is up to par with the European standard, because that's one of the main sort of complaint when it comes to European buyers, that the quality is not consistent. So here are some examples of trade shows that are quite significant, and that you may think about visiting in order to meet buyers from Scandinavia or Sweden or Europe, because like a lot of the Swedish buyers actually visit European trade shows as well. So when it comes to some of the Swedish ones, so we have the Nordic Organic Food Fair, as well as the Fast Food and Cafe and Restaurant Expo. And when it comes to some of the European trade shows, these include Anuga, that takes place in Germany. And then we have Food Ingredients that takes place in Paris. We also have Cial that also takes place in France. And also Biofach, which is a trade show that focuses solely on organic certified food products and ingredients. So to conclude, these are the main takeaways from this presentation. So as I said, for the Swedish market, for the most part, importers or food processors actually source from other European countries, but there are importers and processors that source directly. These tend to be the larger ones in size. Okay. And there are opportunities for raw materials that are not produced in Europe. I gave some examples there: turmeric, carrageenans, guar, etc. So when you have ingredients that cannot grow in Europe, you have a high chance that these European or Swedish buyers will actually pay attention to you. And then EU regulation is mandatory. You have to abide by. You have to make sure that you abide by all the EU legislation. And quality, that's a very important point. Your quality has to be consistent. When you send a sample to buyers, make sure that the subsequent delivery is of the same quality. This creates trust, and European or Swedish buyers, they will be more than happy to work with you if your quality is consistent. And also importance of traceability and transparency and sustainable production methods. So this is really linked to kind of increasing awareness of consumers, where consumers are looking at what kind of environmental impact the food they purchase or eat has, and they are demanding that the food companies actually have traceable and sustainable supply chains. And then again, buyers actually demand this from their suppliers. So we expect this trend to become even more important. And you can sort of ensure this by various sort of certifications as well. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. And me and Amarjit, we are happy to answer your questions.
Okay, so Avita has just finished the seminar, so we want to welcome questions from you. Now, there's a first question from Makaya. Is there an online database of Swedish companies where interested exporters can consult? And maybe Avita or maybe Emma can give some insights on that. As far as I'm aware, for food ingredients, there is nothing particular for the Swedish market. I know there's quite a few online trading floors, etc., for Europe and for international markets, but maybe one of the panelists would want to give some insights there, if there's anything particular for the Swedish market.
Maybe I just add before Emma adds as well. So there's not such a specific database. But the places where you can look, you can go on some of these trade shows website, and you can look for buyers there in the exhibitors list. Another option is to look up various food associations on the Swedish market, where they have members lists, so you can go through them. And also, I think we've done study for the Open Trade Gate Sweden with some list of medium for food traders. So there may be lists like that as well available. Is that correct, Emma?
Yes, there are some databases. I don't have the names right now. I wouldn't say that it's only ingredients. It's mainly suppliers in general, and usually it implies a fee to register for the database. But we have some information on our website when it comes to finding a buyer, and I think that's also, Evita, as you mentioned, we also recommend looking at different trade fairs to seeing the participants that have attended, for example, and contacting them. So not only using a database, but there are more information on our website.
Okay, there was another question from Ali. He was asking, he's saying he's from Azerbaijan. It's the first time for us. What can we do as the first step to get into the market? Now, what would be really good to know is a bit more details about your ingredients or your products, because as Evita just highlighted, it really depends on the ingredients, and that's going to vary your market entry route, whether you can deal with traders, importers, large food processors directly, and also if it's it's organic or if it's certified. So if you can give us more details, we're happy to give you some insights there. Okay, it's a question from Peter. What options are available for certifying the product I deal in, honey and groundnut nuts? Maybe I'll start with that one first. So the most important certification scheme in Europe and in Sweden is organic. The organic food market is worth about 50 billion euros compared to about 9 billion euros for the fair trade products market, which is the second biggest one. So I would say if you're looking at certification, look at organic. The second one would be to look at fair trade. And then you have other schemes, but those two are probably the most important ones to get to the Swedish market. And so in summary, look at the EU organic certification, and the second one, Fair Trade International or Fair for Life. And I'm going to come back to Ali's question. So we mostly have nuts and meat, poultry. So maybe I can start with that question, then Evita can give some insights. There's going to be more opportunity with nuts than meat. The main reason is a lot of nuts are already being imported into Sweden. They're imported into Europe. A lot of nuts cannot be produced in Europe. So there's high volumes of imports of things like cashews, Brazil nuts, macadamias. Meat, there is not so much opportunity, mainly because there's a lot of, there's a big meat sector in Sweden. As Evita showed, it's the biggest sector in the Swedish food market. And there's a very strong production center as well. Sweden produces a lot of beef, it produces pork. One of the biggest pork producers in all of Europe is based in neighboring Denmark. So, and also tariffs, it makes it very difficult for meat products, especially fresh products, to come into Europe. So we would say look at nuts. That's going to be more applicable. There's a lot of nuts already being imported, and there will be good opportunities there. Evita, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I just want to second what you've already said. So, I mean, in general, on the whole, the rule is that there's more opportunities for ingredients and food products that cannot grow or be produced in Europe. So yes, any kind of nuts. So yeah, that's definitely more prospective than meat products.
There's a next question from Jose on the slide about breakdown by product category. Are the percentages by value or by volumes? I believe that's by value.
Yes, that's by value.
Okay, and another question from Roland. Can these trade shows happen in developing countries, for example, in Uganda? Okay, maybe I can answer this question. If you're looking to export to the Swedish market, you're really going to have to look to go to a trade show in Sweden or in Scandinavia or the Nordic region, if not in Europe. The trade shows usually happen in the local market. That's where the buyers are exhibiting or attending, and that's where they want to meet products. So the trade shows in Europe, food ingredients, Anuga, Sial, etc., they're made for access to the European market. So although there are trade shows in Africa, they're really for the African market, meaning to access them. So it's very important, if you want to come to Sweden, really do consider looking at those trade shows, which Avita mentioned. There's a organic food fair, eco living. There's the cafe one that she mentioned, and the ones in Europe as well. Okay, now there's a question.
Maybe I can add. So I mean, we understand that attending trade show involves lots of costs, and not everyone can afford it. But what you can do if you don't necessarily want to or cannot attend, especially since COVID, a lot of these trade shows actually have their own online platforms where the attendees actually register. They have their profile there, so you can actually, if you create your own profile, if you register, you can actually find a list of attendees, and you can screen them and filter them, and even send them a message, approach them. So this could be your first point of contact. So instead of just investing into a trip to Europe, maybe that's will be that can happen later, but you can always approach some of the attendees via these online platforms.
Yeah, and I can just add that we see that the Swedish buyers are also, as you mentioned as well, they are going to the European fairs. So that's where they're present even more maybe than the fairs in Sweden, actually. So Anuga, Sial, Biofach, they have Swedish importers that go there specifically to find buyers, or to find producers. So it's a good place to, even though it's in Germany or France, it's always a good place to meet Swedish or Nordic buyers as well.
Okay, there's a couple of questions. One from Councillor Antonio Pera, and there's another one from Ali, and the opportunities for pecan nuts, as well as beans, onions, and other vegetables. So Avita, maybe you would like to give some comments?
Well, in terms of pecan nuts, I think, just repeating of what was just said. So yes, nuts, I think there's a lot of opportunities there, especially when these kind of nuts, they're not grown in Europe. In terms of, what was the other products? Beans and...
beans, onions, and other vegetables.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so again, commodities such as onions and beans. I'm not sure what kind of beans, but again, there's a lot of availability of these commodities and in Europe already. So there may not be that many opportunities there for you as opposed to the pecan nuts.
Okay, just some additional points there. When you talk about this, is answering the question for Ali, and also the councillor, it really depends upon the trade flows. For example, things like onions, we're aware that there are imports of onions and beans coming in from, say, New Zealand, Southern Hemisphere countries when it's off season. So I think what you should also look at is look at what's produced in Europe and look at the trade. And when it's off season, for example, the production season is closed here in Europe and in Sweden, then it's easier to export in. But if you're trying to compete with, say, Swedish or European producers, it's going to be very difficult because of tariffs. And we'll go to the next question, which is from Sagri. Now, we work with isolated indigenous communities in the Amazonian basin, but there it is really difficult to get an organic certification. How can we export this kind of products, tonka beans, wild harvest cocoa, exotic nuts like swari nuts? Okay, now, I hear what you're saying, but from work that we've done, and we've done some work for agencies like Apex Brazil, and we worked with other Brazilian producers, I understand it is difficult, but you do have certification there. And the major one I would say is EcoCert. We're aware that Brazil, you have your own national organic standard for organic products, but that is not recognized here in Europe. So what you really need is a standard. You need to certify according to the EU regulations, and EcoCert have an office in Brazil, and they're already certifying food products, organic food products, ingredients, as well as organic ingredients for the cosmetics industry, according to EU standard. So what we'd suggest is look at EcoCert, look at European standards. Other organizations like SCS are in Brazil, Intertech are in Brazil. And the second point I want to make there is we've seen some Brazilian companies doing very well here in Europe because they're marketing it on that. It's organic, it's fairly traded, it's from the Amazon, it's helping indigenous communities. So I think that's a great story you have if you can get the certification, and that's really going to give you an edge, because here in Europe, ethical consumerism is very big, and it's not just about being organic, it's got to have a social impact. And if you are sourcing from indigenous communities, I think that's a great plus, but it's a question of getting the certification and then marketing it on those attributes. Okay, here's a question from Peter. Thank you for the answered questions. However, do we have laboratories or certification centers across the world that we would use for acquiring the certification? Okay, now let me just repeat that question a little bit differently, or answer that question a bit differently. The EU has an organic standard, which if you want to access any country in Europe, including Sweden, you need to adhere to that European standard. Now, there are various certification agencies, and actually the big ones worldwide now, whether they're companies like Intertech, SCS, there's also Control Union, etc. They are all providing certification for organic. So if you look in your country and you look for certification agencies or standards, ISO standards, agencies that provide the certification, they will provide organic as well. So nowadays, you can find agencies within your country that provide standards like ISO, Global GAP, Fair Trade, Organic, MSC, etc. So it's a matter of finding those agencies, and you can tell them you want to access the European market for organic products, and then they will tell you if they can do organic certification. Okay, some more questions. Much clearer located in Venezuela. Okay, what transportation method is often used to deliver nuts to Sweden? So, Avita, is there something you can comment on?
Yes, so in general, the rule is that shipping is preferred for like larger volumes. Air freight is also used, but it's usually used for smaller volumes. So I mean, it's in general, shipping is more preferred. However, it takes longer, and it's also cheaper. So this is the preferred way.
Okay, we have another question. This is Ruby from Huang Binh Nut Stock Company, and they're a rice factory from Vietnam. They want to supply Vietnamese rice to Sweden. Okay, now the first thing there is a lot of rice is already being imported into Europe and Sweden. It's coming in from Asian countries like India, Pakistan, Vietnam, China, etc. If you're looking at opportunities, my personal recommendation is look at organic rice production, because Vietnam is already exporting quite a lot of organic products to Europe. You're producing shrimp, you're producing rice, you're producing different commodities. And I think if you're providing organic, one, you're meeting a quality standard. And the second point is you're going to get a premium, you're going to get a higher price. So my suggestion is, yes, there are opportunities here, but look at organic production. That will give you a premium and it will show that you're adhering to a high quality. Okay, any further questions? Or Vita, do you want to make any further comments?
No, I just second what you said. Yes.
Well, if there's no other questions, as I said earlier, this webinar has been recorded and we will send it out to everyone, all the registered people. After we've transcribed it, we will send it out so you can watch it. You can send it to other people as well and watch it again if you feel like you enjoyed it. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending and yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.